In 2024, millions of people woke up with severe brain fog, thinking they just needed, like, another cup of coffee. Why? Because they don't realize that to actually keep your mind, you literally have to lose a massive piece of it every single night.
Yeah, you really do. The literature calls it the glymphatic system. Notice the G there.
Yeah.
And what the latest neuroscience reveals is that sleep is not just this, passive resting state. It's a violently industrious, mechanically intense process.
Right. And if you are obsessed with the actual biology behind human success, well, you are in the right place. Hit subscribe and turn on that bell to join the Insight Lab. We drop deep dives like this every week to help you outsmart the average. So let's get into the data.
Let's do it.
Most people think pulling all-nighters or, pushing through exhaustion is the answer. It is completely not. Today we are breaking down the intelligence paradox and why your waking brain is actually its own worst enemy.
It really is. I mean, we all know the brain is an incredibly energy-expensive organ, right? It consumes around 20% of your body's entire resting energy, even though it's like only 2% of your total weight.
Which is a crazy ratio.
Exactly. But the recent papers really zero in on the mechanical cost of that extreme burn rate. You cannot have that level of metabolic activity without generating a massive amount of chemical waste.
And in the research, I was super struck by how they framed Beta-Amyloid. We universally associate that word with Alzheimer's disease, the sticky plaques that cause brain cells to die.
Oh, absolutely. But the papers make it crystal clear that beta-amyloid isn't some foreign infection you catch. It's just a standard daily metabolic byproduct.
Wait, so you and I are generating it right now just by having this conversation?
We are, yeah. It is an unavoidable consequence of thinking. Whenever a neuron fires, there's this complex cascade of protein synthesis happening. There's a protein sitting on your neurons, and during high activity, enzymes literally chop it up.
That sounds intense.
It is, and they release these beta-amyloid fragments directly into the microscopic spaces, the interstitial fluid between your brain cells.
Okay, so to visualize this, it's like your waking brain is a Michelin star restaurant kitchen at peak dinner rush. The neurons are the elite chefs moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, searing steaks, and communicating constantly to get orders out.
That is a great way to look at it. But that elite execution generates so much debris. Every action potential is another chopped vegetable or, a grease-covered pan just thrown on the floor.
Right, so the dishes are piling up everywhere. But here is my issue with this, and I really want to push back on the science here.
Go for it.
If the human brain is the most advanced structure in the known universe, why can't it just clean up as it goes? It seems like a massive evolutionary flaw to let toxic proteins build up all day instead of just running a concurrent maintenance system.
It does seem like a design flaw, right? Until you look at the strict energy budget the brain has to operate under. Neuroscientists call this the 70% decision rule.
Wait, meaning 70% of our total daily calories go to the brain?
No, it refers to 70% of the brain's local energy currency, specifically ATP. Up to 70% of the ATP generated in the brain is consumed exclusively by neurons firing and resetting.
Oh, wow. So just the act of thinking takes almost everything the organ can muster.
Exactly. There literally is not enough power left in the grid to run the heavy machinery required for a deep clean. I mean, pumping fluid through dense brain tissue takes massive amounts of energy.
So if the brain tried to divert energy to clean during the day, your processing speed would just tank.
You would be sluggish, totally inattentive, and from a survival standpoint, you'd probably get eaten by a predator because you were, too busy sweeping the floor to notice a tiger in the grass.
That makes so much sense. So the brain is forced to prioritize active processing during the day, totally accepting that the chemical trash is just going to pile up.
Right. It defers all the heavy-duty clearance to when you are safely unconscious. And the mechanics of this deferred maintenance window are just mind-blowing. The brain undergoes this massive physical transformation.
This is where we get into the core mechanism of the glymphatic system, right? Since the brain is isolated behind the blood-brain barrier, it relies on glia, specifically astrocytes.
Yes, astrocytes. Now, glia are the support network. They regulate blood flow and hold the neural architecture together. But when you enter slow-wave sleep, they do something unbelievable.
The literature states these cells shrink by up to 60%, which is an insane volumetric reduction.
It is staggering. And what is crucial is how they know to shrink. As you transition into deep sleep, your brain experiences a steep drop in norepinephrine, which is a neurotransmitter that drives arousal.
So the chemical signal for being awake and alert just bottoms out.
Exactly. And when that drops, it acts as a mechanical trigger. The astrocytes pump out specific ions, water follows, and the cells rapidly deflate. They physically shrink away from the neurons.
A 60% shrinkage means the physical landscape of the brain completely alters. The source material had this analogy that made it incredibly visceral for me.
The night market one.
Yeah, so imagine a bustling night market in Kuala Lumpur during peak hours. The stalls are packed tightly, awnings overlap, people are shoulder to shoulder. It is an impenetrable maze.
Which is a highly accurate representation of your waking brain. The cells are engorged to ensure rapid signal transmission. The physical gap between the cells is incredibly narrow.
But when the market shuts down, the vendors physically fold up the stalls. They collapse the tables and pack everything away. Suddenly, those narrow pathways become massive, wide-open lanes.
The 60% contraction of the astrocytes widens the space by over half. They fold up the stalls, creating these macro channels throughout the brain tissue that simply did not exist an hour prior.
And with the physical streets finally clear, the heavy-duty cleaning crew can actually get inside the neighborhood.
Exactly. This brings us to the fluid dynamics. The central nervous system is bathed in cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. Once those deep sleep channels open up, the CSF is actively driven into the brain tissue itself.
The research mentions specific channels called aquaporin 4 receptors that facilitate this rush of fluid.
Right. The astrocytes have these water channels on their end feet which wrap around the blood vessels. The pulsing of your arteries as your heart beats acts as a mechanical pump.
Wait, so your own heartbeat forcefully drives the fluid deep into the newly widened spaces?
Yeah, exactly.
That's wild. It is a highly pressurized system. It is not a gentle soak. It is the city sending in street sweepers with high-pressure fire hoses.
Convective flow is the technical term. The pressurized CSF washes through the tissue, picking up all the accumulated beta-amyloid and metabolic debris from the day's cognitive work.
It flushes them out to be processed by the liver. And this pressurized wash has massive next-day consequences for our neurochemistry, specifically the resetting of our dopamine loops.
Yes, dopamine dynamics are highly sensitive to the local cellular environment. When metabolic waste accumulates, it physically blocks the receptors and alters the local pH.
So the receptors become blunted.
The signal-to-noise ratio is completely degraded. The dopamine releases, but it cannot bind effectively because the environment is polluted. By flushing out that debris, the CSF restores your baseline.
You wake up with highly sensitive dopamine pathways, meaning you feel motivated, sharp, and capable of sustained focus. Which brings this right back to your daily experience.
You mean brain fog?
Exactly. That heavy, sludgy brain fog you feel after a terrible night of sleep where you can't string a thought together. We usually dismiss it as just a bad mood.
But the biological reality is that brain fog is the subjective experience of a physically polluted neural environment. You didn't reach deep sleep, so the glia never shrank.
The stalls in the market stayed open.
Right. The streets stayed narrow, locking out the high-pressure CSF fire hoses. The toxic beta-amyloid from yesterday is still sitting in the synapses, degrading your dopamine signals.
You are trying to run today's Michelin star dinner service using yesterday's filthy, grease-covered equipment, which forces us to confront how we apply this.
Absolutely. We live in a culture obsessed with bypassing biology. People want a supplement or a hack so they can run on 4 hours of sleep.
But you cannot biohack fluid dynamics. Which brings us to the actionable insight for today, what we call the Insight Lab Protocol. It's a very simple mental check.
There are absolutely no shortcuts here. The pressurized clearance of neurotoxins requires a rigid sequence: delta waves, neurotransmitter drops, astrocyte deflation, and steady arterial pumping.
So step one of the protocol is realizing it requires a non-negotiable 7 to 8 hours to run the full cycle. If you cut your sleep short, you're basically firing the cleaning crew in the middle of their shift.
They drop the hoses and leave while half your brain is still covered in toxic debris, and that incomplete cycle compounds over time.
Hustle culture frames sleep deprivation as a badge of honor. But operating on a chronically unwashed brain is literally cognitive self-sabotage.
It is. Peak cognitive focus depends on the structural maintenance that only occurs when you are completely unconscious. You have to surrender to the shrinkage.
So rebrand your bedtime. Stop thinking of it as shutting down. It is your nightly brainwash, an active, aggressive preparation for work where your brain shrinks by 60% to flush out the day's toxins.
And the long-term implications are sobering. Beta-amyloid is a key driver of Alzheimer's when it forms plaques. Brain fog is just the immediate symptom of a dirty brain.
So the consequences escalate from a bad morning to permanent structural damage.
Exactly. If brain fog is the short-term symptom, how many nights of abbreviated sleep does it take before the daily trash starts to irreversibly damage the architecture of your mind?
That is a chilling thought. If you realize today that your IQ is basically a trap without a physical brainwash, you are only halfway there. Because the way you sleep actually determines if you can use that IQ at all. Watch our breakdown on the billionaire sleep myth right here to complete the puzzle. We will see you over there.